making films again. Good afternoon. There's some questions. Usually in the retreats they give here, we give people an opportunity to have interviews too. But that's a 6-day retreat, 7-day retreat really. At least that's what they advertise. It actually lasts for 6 days. They also allow people, if they want, to write something down, because you want to ask more than simple questions about breathing in and breathing out. So it'll be interesting to see how your questions differ from the normal ones. Because you are a different group. Let's have a look. There's 2 here. I departed with my boyfriend, split up, I assume, and had an argument with my boss before I came to the retreat. The feeling of hatred is less than Tao. And how can I forget about the bad feelings when I return to my usual life? Can I forgive them when I face them again? Yeah, of course you can. And there's also the problem with things like that is once you let them happen, if you have an argument with somebody, it means you've attached in some form, some way. That's why you're having an argument, because you've attached to a certain point of view about something or other which somebody either has another opinion on or something of that sort. So it's attachment, it's always attachment. It creates an ego sense. And so you have an argument, the ego sense grows. As you argue, it develops, it becomes totally dominant and then gradually fades away. So you will forget over a period of time. But if you want to treat it with metta practice, you can. Feeling of hate, real hate, or just kind of irritation will depend. If it's hatred, yeah, you should do that, because hatred is a dangerous thing. It can poison your mind and lead to other problems too. With the boyfriend, I think that's probably not too... there's plenty of fish in the sea, you know. Boyfriend, you can probably get back together again sooner or later, or that's the end of it. Either way, you can deal with it by learning to be more mindful when you think about these things and stopping your mind from getting involved when the thought comes up. When you remember anything unpleasant or anything pleasant, and it tends to be this, what they call papancha, the mind proliferates, it thinks, it imagines, independence on the memory that's come up. So if you had a scene with your boyfriend and a bad deal with your boss, every time you think about those things, every time they come into your mind, unless you're very clever and very sharp, mindfully, then you'll start to think and imagine. And then the problem is there again. You feel more or less the same as you did when the problem occurred first time. Treating dislike or hate, it has to be metta. You have to try and deal with it in a sensible way. Reflect on it, on what happened. And try and accept that whatever was done at the time, I'm talking about your boss now, whatever was done at the time, there's a reason for it. Everybody suffers. Everybody has defilement. Everybody wants to be happy. And we're often driven by our defilements. In fact, we are all the time. Argument doesn't mean you got the sack or something. If you got the sack, then okay. It's no longer a problem. But if you got to go back there, it would be a good idea to work on that in your mind with a metta practice, because you're probably looking on this guy as your enemy right now. So it's one of the basic subjects for metta, the enemy, the last one, the one who's done something to you you didn't like. If it was your fault and you were in the wrong, then you need to deal with it in a different way, and you should apologize to Tsui, because that is a kind of form of metta practice in itself, swallowing our pride and admitting we were wrong. I think a boyfriend bit is not to be worried about too much. As I said, there's always something else tomorrow or the day after. But if you do feel guilty about something, or you had an argument and you don't feel happy about it, then again, metta practice will help that. You reflect on the argument itself and what was said and why you said what you said and why your boyfriend said what he said, if it was an argument involved. And learn to accept that people are what they are because of what they've been. We're all conditioned by our lives, so we tend to respond accordingly. I practice meditation to try and avoid doing that in the future, to respond to people in a more careful way. And we have arguments because we don't respond mindfully. We tend to just jump into something. And especially if it's someone close, personal relationship, those things tend to blow over, I think, fairly quickly. But you can use metta with an argument, especially if you're carrying feelings of aversion. Now it would be a good idea to take whoever this is and focus on them and reflect on them, reflect on their lives. It depends whose fault it was, though. I need to know a bit more. If it was your fault, then you need to reflect on your own life. You do what you do because of your conditioning, by the where you were brought up as a child and the things you've experienced. It's turned you into a certain kind of person. Reflect on that, learn to accept it, and maybe you can let the memory go more easily by doing that. If the fault is on the other side, at least from your point of view, then you learn to accept and forgive. And metta is a large part of that also. Ultimately, it all comes down to mindfulness. If you can be aware enough of life, not moment by moment, I don't think many people can do that. But if you can be aware enough of life, you can avoid these kind of problems quite easily. You see them coming. You see arguments coming, they begin to arise, they start from a source. And if you have enough mindfulness, you can just turn away and take a few deep breaths, as mentioned. And then the argument probably won't be an argument, more like a discussion. You can always be reasonable anyway with people, even when they're angry and shouting at you. You don't have to be angry too. Mindfulness helps in that way. You can, let them shout. Just be reasonable, be gentle. If your mindfulness is good enough, you can react in this way. I mean, arguments come from a lack of mindfulness always. I haven't had an argument for years. I never was argumentative, though I used to kind of just walk away, which infuriated some people. But I always found that the best way to avoid those kinds of things. But these days I don't ever come across, there's never the condition in my life that creates an argument. And if I was faced with the possibility, I would assume I'd be mindful enough to follow my own advice. And if somebody's angry with me, then I'd let them vent their anger. I've been criticized quite strongly by people. And it's not nice to be criticized, especially if the criticism is not too accurate, but I kind of always reflect on what's really happening when this kind of thing takes place. If it's just one person, it soon subsides, because if you don't respond, there's no fuel. You don't put any fuel on the fire. And they soon run out of things to say. And then after a day or two, you can deal with them. You can talk together in a much more sensible way. But loving kindness, metta practice would help with your boss for sure. Your boyfriend, I don't know about that. You have to deal with that in your own way. We've touched on the contradiction between the first step of metta, self-love, and the Buddhist doctrine of eliminating the self-illusion. Can you reconcile this contradiction in more detail? Could you also elaborate on this loving of oneself in metta and any steps to achieve it? Well, the problem with human beings, according to Buddhists, is we have this feeling of being me, which is excessive. And one of the ways you overcome it is by practicing self-love, which does sound like a contradiction, and indeed is, but you have to use what you've got. You can't just get rid of the feeling of being me. And metta practice is essential because the things that support the self-sense are aversion, lust, and delusion. And metta is going to work particularly with aversion, but it will also work to some extent with the other two. Because practicing metta is not just about beaming love around, it's also about, again, developing the mind. It does develop a level of concentration, and it also hones your mindfulness. There's no other way you can learn to love yourself than by reflecting on what you are and what you've been. We should stay in the present moment. Well, when are you reflecting? You don't go into the past to reflect. You're reflecting here and now. And if the reflection is wise enough, then it's really not going to do any real damage. Besides, you should be aware, I think I've mentioned this, that defilements are two-edged. It's like a two-edged sword. They're not just what they call akusala, or unskillful. Greed, aversion and delusion are the unskillful root defilements. But there are also skillful root defilements, non-greed, non-aversion, non-delusion. They both need to be eradicated ultimately, but you have to use one to lessen the other. This is why, although it's a contradiction in terms to talk about not self and then to talk about loving ourselves, but we have to deal with these defilements in the only way we can. We have to convert them into the sort of defilement which leads our life for us, but drives us in a way which ultimately is going to be more beneficial than just following the dictates of the wrong forms of desire. So you need to drive out the unskillful defilements with the skillful defilements, but the defilements will still be there, and so will the feeling of being me. But you'll be called a good person then, in the normal way of describing people, bad people, good people. If you don't understand this, then you might think that being a good person is the aim of Buddhism, but it's actually to get rid of all that stuff completely and utterly. So you have to use what you've got. Everybody has defilement. Everybody has good defilement. Everybody has bad defilement. Mostly it's bad defilement that dominates. When you practice meditation, you don't destroy the defilements, but you do strengthen what they call the defilements of non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion. And by doing that, you also lessen the defilements of greed, hate, and delusion. So you have to use what you've got. Insight will solve the problem for you, providing it's strong enough. The defilements rely entirely on self-belief. So if you can destroy the feeling of self, then the defilements are gone. If you concentrate to a reasonable level, the defilements are gone, but they come back again once you aren't concentrated. Loving yourself is not an easy thing to deal with. I know if you've always had a kind of negative approach to yourself as a person, a lack of self-esteem is common among human beings at a certain age, and I certainly had it. When I was younger, I went through a period of about 5 years where I was totally lacking in confidence, and really feelings of worthlessness accompanied me everywhere I went. It was a horrible experience. But when I think back on my life, and the way I reflect on it is, I want to be happy like everybody else. I might not say that openly. I might never really think it in the usual way, but it's here. It's in the mind. It's in the creature. Everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to be unhappy. And the things I've done, the dumb things I've done particularly, I've been seeking blindly for some kind of happiness, something to make me feel better about myself, to make me feel more normal like everybody else, if you like. I reflect on that because the good parts of my life are easy for me to reflect on. There aren't that many of them, although the last 30 years have been quite reasonable. But to learn to forgive myself and to love myself as a person, I need personally to go back into my history and deal with the things I've done, all the dumb things I've done, and learn to accept that I did those things because that's the way I've been conditioned by the life I've led. by my parents, by all the people I've met and had intercourse with on whatever level. All the experiences I've had have turned me into a certain kind of person, because I've reacted to them in a stupid way. And so I go back and I observe that. If I really want to do a job on myself, I think I need to do this. It's not good enough for me as a human being to simply focus on the good bits. And so I go back and I think about my past life, different parts of it. I'm not an evil person, but I've done a lot of stupid things. And that's where self-loathing comes from. You do things you know you shouldn't do, but you still do them. And delusion makes us do that. But I can now reflect in a clear way on why I behaved the way I did, and forgive myself for doing that, and accept that that is why I turned that into being the sort of person I've become. It's all part of the process. If you have lots of good things in your life, lots of behaviors you can feel, let's say, proud of, to use a common English word, and the idea of reflecting on those is to generate self-love again. It works well, but I think we also need, although it's not mentioned usually, to go back and consider the unpleasant parts of our lives, the unskillful activities. Having said that, though, I would be inclined to focus on the more positive aspects for a time before I start to do that. I wouldn't advise people to just remember all the mistakes they've made without, first of all, reflecting on the good parts of the good things they've done during their career as a human being. So that's what I'd advise you to do if you're into this stuff big time. Some people go to retreats, metta retreats, and they seem to practice only on the positive side of things. In my case, and certainly from my point of view, once you have some respect for yourself as a human being from your practice and from your development of metta and of mindfulness generally, then it's not a bad thing at all to reflect on the mistakes you've made and learn to accept that that's just the way things are. Okay, I've done some dumb things, and believe me, there's one thing I've taken me a long time to come to terms with. But these things have to be faced. It's one of those things that when I think of it, I try not to think of it, because it horrifies me to think that I actually did that. But I did it, and it's better to face it and then to trace the causes that lay behind that form of behavior I was involved in at that time. It was probably not as bad as I remember it, because memory is a great deceiver. But it could have been, well, really beyond the pale. What I did, I'm not going to tell you. But I've managed to come to terms with it, so I can think about something that in the past I could not face. It made me really cringe with shame and fear too about what might have happened if it had gone on much longer than I allowed it to. And now I can face that and sort of rationalize it in a wise way, not in a foolish way. And that to me is a gain, because I can see the causes and conditions more clearly behind what made me the sort of person I was at that time. Fortunately, I didn't do what I was trying to do, which was, well, I wasn't really trying, it was just one of those things that happened. If it had happened, I wouldn't be here now, that's for sure. I'd be alive, but in a very different form of life. So reflect on the unpleasant parts of your life also. There's quite a lot of those in my case, so there's plenty of work to do. And learn to accept them, learn to reflect and know the reasons and causes behind your behavior at that particular time. We're all created by nature, and we all live experiencing sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, as well as mental objects. We're constantly thinking and imagining. To think that none of this has any effect on us as human beings is naive in the extreme. We're products of our environment, very much so. During meditation, I've been constantly thinking about my work, although I've been trying to control my breath. Should I let the thinking finish, or should I stop it immediately? Look, if you think about your work, you won't think about anything else. If you let the thinking finish, it probably won't. But if you have a problem, a definite problem that requires a solution, then a nice quiet place like this, okay, it's not what you're here for, but it can be a kind of meditation to work out the details and try and see it more clearly. what you need to do, what decisions you need to come to. I have to produce some pictures for somebody. And I used a meditation session a couple of hours some time back to do just that, visualizing what I was going to produce, until I was satisfied, and then I just let it go and didn't think about it again. I haven't done them yet, so I suppose I should start thinking about it again. So if you have some problem associated with your work or something you need to decide, then okay. You can use a quiet place like this to work out just what you need to do and see if you can come to a firm decision. If you can't, though, if the mind just goes on thinking, then recognize that you've fed one of the nirvana, you've got the defilements moving. You're bound to do that. But if you can come to a decision and then stop right there, okay, that's fine, wrap it up, put it away, then there's no harm in doing that. This place is quiet and secluded, and it allows us to think a little more clearly, at least after a day or so. But just letting the mind think, that's not wise, because it'll probably just go on thinking. It'll go from the original subject that you're thinking about, and instead of stopping, find something else to think about. Some memory might come up, or you might start probing into the future in a different way. So ultimately it's not wise. You're here to meditate, and that's what we should try to do. But if you have something to do in your life in the future after you leave here, it's not always easy to stop thinking about things like that. You've already started the thinking process before you came here, and it's just continuing. So you might as well take some time, if you haven't already done that, and try and come to a definite decision about whatever it is you have to decide over. Politics over religions, it seems. Can't read that word. The problem is, ruining images of Buddhism. What's your view? Ruining images of Buddhism? I think that's... There's people been... ruining the image of Buddhism. I'm not quite sure what you mean. It can't be Buddha images you're worried about. Politics. Look, Thailand is an organization. It's like a business, like any country. I mean, people from Hong Kong, you're living in a business, come on. It's obvious, surely. There's very little consideration of the individual, other than the fact that we keep that business running. Any country is like this. And any religious system that arises, once it becomes a religion, any system of practice or way of life like Buddhism, once it arises and becomes a religion, becomes useless immediately in the ultimate sense. But Buddhadasa used to talk a lot about this kind of thing. It's probably one of the things that got him into trouble in this country. He always said that religion, when it's been politicized or become a structure, part of the pillars of society, is useful for keeping people operating in a reasonable way. In organized societies, you can't just let people do what they want. You can't really be individuals. You have to fit into a system. You have to become one of the crowd. You have to play the game, do your duty, take the education you have and use it, earn money for yourself and your family, and therefore support the system you're a part of. Religion plays its part in that by keeping us moral and by restraining our behavior. It also, though, makes us very narrow human beings. I can't help thinking of Marx's division of labor. He talked a lot about that in Capital. How capitalism takes human beings, and there's something called a division of labor, where people they find out what your skills are, and then you're educated in a certain way. You're taught to do one thing really well. You see this in factories in days gone by, maybe not so much now, before machines began to build cars. I mean, one man did this, one woman did the same job nearly all their lives, screwing in 10 screws in a certain place with a power screwdriver. That was what their skill was. They could do it so quickly and without thinking. It was just like part of a big machine. In a way, that's what we become if we live in an organized society. We haven't really got much choice. It conditions you in certain ways, and religious belief tends to keep you kind of quiet, keep you sort of under control to some degree. Or it did. I always think the religion these days is consumerism, and so did Buddhadasa. He called it materialism because consumerism wasn't a popular word when he was railing against these things. He talked about development, and he talked about right and wrong development, and I'm sure he will consider that what's been happening in Thailand and what's happened in the West ever since I was young practically would be a wrong form of development, because it doesn't develop a human being in a proper way. Marx's division of labor. When I was at school, they stream you into two streams. It's the beginning of the division of labor. They put the clever ones in the science stream and the unclever ones in the art stream. I mean, it contains the poets and the thinkers. In the science stream, though, is to a modern society much more useful than people with inventive minds who can compose music and stuff like that. They're not considered important. I'm not saying music is essential for mental development of human beings, but I think to a certain extent it is. Freedom of expression of that kind. So Buddhadasa would say if development of, say, the country you live in develops in such a way that it becomes more oppressive, there's more violence, there's more law breaking, your rights are cut down continually, does it remind you of anywhere? It's been happening in the United States for a long, long time. People just let it happen. It will go on until it's a total dictatorship. I'm sure some people can see that coming already. The right kind of development is to have an organization that we call a country that actually feels for its population and assists people, encourages people to develop themselves in the way you guys have been trying to do here. Meditation practice, religion used properly, not just as some pillar of society to keep people under control, but to actually develop their abilities in the right way, so they become more full and complete human beings. We're a long way from that, and whether it will ever happen, I don't know. There are supposed to be ages in human development, the development of the world we live in. It's supposed to go through certain ages according to the Hindu beliefs, the old Hindu beliefs, or what predated Hinduism. There's an iron age, there's a lead age also, there's a golden age, but apparently that's long gone. And what we're living in now is the iron age. That doesn't mean we're living in caves or anything, but mentally, in a sense, we are. We're not progressing in the way we should. I don't mean societies, and consumerism is inventing things all the time. But have you noticed that the world we live in hasn't really changed that much in the last 50 years? I mean, still the same basic world that I was aware of when I was about 18, 19, 20. Okay, now you have high-definition movies, but the movies aren't that different, they're just more gross. You still have motor cars that burn fossil fuels, and pollute the atmosphere left, right, and centre. That's not development which is useful to anyone. It's not useful to us, it's not useful to the planet we live on. The problem, of course, is that it's not just us that's ignorant, it's the people who run the world. They're a lot worse than we are. The powers that actually lie behind governments and encourage them to make certain decisions. I feel the enemy is myself. Why? Well, you're right, the enemy is yourself. There's something in you that wants to do something, and another thing in you that don't. That's why we have a problem with meditation, because the defilements are the enemy, and that's us. The ego sense is the enemy. It's often difficult to explain this, but when you think about it, the ego is a living entity. The Buddhists say it's an illusion. That's true. It's just a thought, but it dominates us, thought or not. I mean, the physical body is just a vehicle for the mind, in a sense. That's true. And if the mind is split in two ways, one side then wants to meditate, one doesn't. One is being led by the unhealthy defilements, one is being encouraged by the healthy defilements. There's an enemy inside you. It's called defilement, unskillful, akusala mula, the unskillful roots. So if you feel the enemy is yourself, you're absolutely right. That's what you need to destroy. First of all, you need to destroy the unhealthy side, the akusala mula, and as mentioned earlier, then you can take on the kusala mula also. Because when the kusala mula becomes stronger, then the feeling of being your own worst enemy will probably be relieved to a large extent. You'll discover there are really two enemies in truth. One that we don't think is an enemy. Okay, the unskillful defilements are obviously an enemy because they keep us locked into a certain kind of behavior which doesn't allow us to develop ourselves at all, at least not in any sensible way. But these skillful root defilements, all non-greed, non-hate, non-delusion, are also our enemy because they also promote self-belief. I mean, there is a difference between being a bad person and a good person, but that's where it is. Both are defiled. Ultimately, you need to get rid of both of them, and then you won't feel you're an enemy anymore because your feelings will be radically different without anything to focus on. Don't mean no feeling of being good or bad. You'll just do what you should do according to the basic promptings of nature, and no more than that. I suppose we are really, when you think about it, our own worst enemies. And meditation's designed to help us deal with that. And the only way it can do that is by reducing self-belief. And that means reducing the defilements. And that means in whatever you do basically now. You might think you're doing something skillful, and I agree we are doing something skillful, but never lose sight of the fact that what's making you meditate is also defilement. So you're always performing what Buddhists call karma. Karma always has its results. Okay, you build up the skillful root defilements, but they still promote self-belief. Meditation, you have to somehow do it right, get to the point. If you want to destroy this problem, you need to be a Buddha. Then you're an entirely natural human being. But how many have managed to do that over the years?
Here's your souvenir poster.
Notice
how I gave you top billing.
Yeah, but there's no photo of me.
Yeah, there is.
Oh, it's small.
Oh, sorry, but next time you could be in gold with a great halo around you.
Yeah, right.